and I did a survey of folks that were looking at urban agriculture. She found more than 20 different definitions. So just as I would suggest that there's no consistent or universally agreed definition around sustainability, I think the same can be said for urban agriculture. So it does mean different things in different places. And it doesn't always, interestingly, have positive connotations. There's places in the world where if you're an urban farmer, well, you're probably squatting on somebody's land. Or maybe you're messing up an urban planner's grand vision for how a city should look. So it's not always viewed through the lens of goodness. I haven't seen the new Batman versus Superman movie yet, but I think this is probably where their beef began. Got Batman and Robin doing all the weeding, and their suit, he's taking all the produce out. Part of the argument around whether or not agriculture is new, or is on the rise, is to ask the question, is it new? And of course it isn't new. It's been around for a long time. Mesopotamian farmers, 3,500 years ago, were setting aside land in their cities to grow food. More recently, some of the experiences that we might be more familiar with, Liberty Gardens from World War II, Victory Gardens from Liberty Gardens from World War I, Victory Gardens from World War II, community garden movement, which I would say is as strong now as it has ever been. And in the 1990s, the rise of the urban sustainability agenda. This is a quote I really enjoy because I'm a kind of an urban planning wonk. So Winston Churchill said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us." I quite often gets paraphrased to say, "We shape our cities, and then our cities shape us." And I think it's critical to pause on that for a second, because how we make land use decisions today, and I think there were some great discussions this morning about how our cities are growing and how they're growing over prime agricultural land. How we choose to grow our cities will have important implications on how we will in turn be able to live in those cities, how livable they will be, what we will be able to get from them. So a couple of stats. Lots of you have probably seen most of this before. More than half of the world's population currently lives in cities. By 2050, it could be as high as 70% of the world's 9.4 billion people. That is astounding to me. Cities produce 50% of the waste that's generated in the world. Depending on the accounting scheme, between 60 and 80% of greenhouse gases. They consume 75% of resources and account for 80% of global GDP. They consume a lot, they return a lot of waste and emissions, and they're really the centers of, they're the economic engines of our modern world. So the urban sustainability agenda. We can't talk about urban agriculture without talking about the urban sustainability agenda, because it fits squarely within that paradigm. The reason that urban agriculture is on the rise is because municipalities are becoming increasingly sophisticated in the understanding of the issues affecting them, and they are rightly seeing that food and food security, and by extension, urban agriculture, has an important part to play. This is a quote I took from Edmonton's food strategy. I think it's a great one in sort of encapsulating that idea. It says, "Ever-increasing issues around environmental, social, and economic sustainability are leading municipal governments to think more creatively about how to address community resilience and livability in relation to food and urban agriculture." I think that's a great sort of summation of why urban agriculture is being taken up by municipalities. That's a nicely drawn nested Venn diagram. Urban agriculture squarely sits in the broader consideration of a food strategy, which sits within a municipality's approach towards urban sustainability, which sits globally within the urban sustainability agenda. So cities really are at the forefront of sustainability. If you think back one or two slides at some of the figures I splashed up there on the greenhouse gas emissions that are being produced, on the waste that are being produced, on the resources that are being consumed, cities are really at the front line. So if we can solve those issues at the city scale, up and up and up we go, we really start to take care of it at the global scale. So drivers for cities. Here's a long list that I populated as I was doing the research for this. I'm not going to read them all. But I wanted to present this because when folks start looking at sustainability, very quickly they start to see the multipliers. You know, if we look at food, growing our own food, well, hey, maybe we can also look at doing a bit more composting. Well, if we're doing a bit more composting, now we're diverting some waste from our landfills. So now we're producing less greenhouse gas emissions down the road. And if we have communities growing food, well, hey, maybe there's a social multiplier in there as well. And now we've got folks working together, they're getting to know their neighbors. So this long list of drivers is really just to emphasize the point that cities are looking at urban agriculture for a raft of reasons, and lots of those are sort of mutually beneficial and reinforcing. All right, so this is one of the questions I was really interested in answering. How much land is being used for urban agriculture? Is it significant? There's a lot of blue up there. I would make the point that it's not insignificant. 5% is not a negligible number. Obviously, we're not going to feed ourselves, or we're not likely to feed ourselves from growing all our own food within a city. That's not necessarily what they're good at. But there is a significant, or at least non-trivial, component of agriculture worldwide that takes place in cities. Food policy development. Food policy is really at the front end, and urban agriculture gets dragged along with it. So this is starting back in 1990. Toronto was the first Canadian municipality to establish a food council. And I'm just going to let a little ticker go through here. Greenland is the year, and the little dots up, popping up show municipalities as they develop food and urban agriculture policy. Does anybody think that looks like a zombie outbreak of some sort? It looks viral through, I don't know why. Zooming in a little bit now to Alberta's urban agriculture reserves, I looked at the two big cities here in Alberta, Edmonton and Calgary. Edmonton right now, 10% of its land is urban agricultural land. In Calgary, it's a bit more. In both these estimates, the work was done based on what is the city limit, so what is the boundary that the city has drawn around itself, and what portion of that can they readily identify as being agricultural. So it doesn't include, for example, backyard gardens. It doesn't include community gardens. And that's something, as we move a little farther into the talk, came up a lot for me when I was doing the research. So much remains unknown about urban agriculture. So what is urban agriculture and what is it not? I think it's a non-trivial in terms of the amount of land that's available. It is a part of a community's overall food strategy, or it can be when municipalities pick it up as a goal, as part of their sustainability agenda. It's unlikely to be a replacement for all our food needs. I don't see that it is a threat to traditional or rural agriculture. What I looked at, the majority of Canadian municipalities that are developing food policies or food charters, they see urban agriculture as sort of augmenting and supporting a broader strategy around providing good, wholesome food, about celebrating food, and they extend that beyond the borders of the city to the region, to the province. So I think that's important to note as well. Where is urban agriculture heading? This is crystal ball gazing, so this is my crack at it. You may have a different thought as to what urban agriculture may do in the future. But I think that as long as cities continue to place an emphasis on becoming more sustainable, it is likely that urban agriculture will continue to increase in its significance, and cities will continue to devote more resources to it. There's already good evidence. I showed you that map with all the places in Canada where municipalities are developing food charters or looking at urban agriculture. And so I think that the trend looks like it's going to increase, and therefore attention around urban agriculture is also going to increase over time. We see that some municipalities are starting to experiment with more exotic forms of agriculture. So we've heard about bees and beekeeping, we've heard about chickens. I think Edmonton just did a pilot program for backyard chickens. We're not there yet in Calgary, but that sort of thing is happening now. It's already going beyond folks just growing their own fruits and vegetables. Now people are saying, I want to do something else. I guess the last piece of that, looking a little farther down the road, is ideas around rooftop gardens, city orchards. Those are also things that are being kind of bandied about. Threats to urban agriculture, I think we got a good dose of that this morning. So I would just add that one of the main threats that I see, well, it's two main threats. One is that it's a new policy area, and governments love successes and they hate failures. So if you are a municipal government and you're trying to roll out some of this stuff, you really want to have success early on. Because if you don't, you might be gun shy about trying to roll out any more of it. So as a new policy area, I think that's an area of potential concern, is a potential threat to urban agriculture continuing to expand in Canada and here in Alberta. The second one is that there's a lack of quantitative data on urban agriculture, and especially on its purported benefits. So I spoke a little bit earlier about, hey, doesn't urban gardening divert waste to compost? Doesn't that mean that we're ending up with less greenhouse gases? Well, yes, that makes sense logically. Lots of people step through those exercises, but there's no data to support it. And when it comes to measuring urban agriculture, I can show you a nice pie chart that says, here's how much land in Edmonton and Calgary is devoted to urban agriculture, but we don't know what it produces necessarily, how much it produces, how much of that food is being consumed locally. We have next to no data on how productive community gardens are. So there's a real lack of good data that is available currently to support the purported benefits of urban agriculture and exactly what urban agriculture actually looks like in our cities. Data gaps, areas for research. Again, a big long list of interesting areas where research could be done. I'm not going to read all of those towards the bottom for anyone who's a soil scientist or maybe works in contaminated sites work. Soil quality in brownfields. Are the soils that we have in the inner city, are they good for doing agriculture? There's lots of misinformation out there about soils that may be impacted or contaminated, and oh, it's going to cost a lot of money if we have to go out and do that testing. I ran into that when I worked on my own community garden in Calgary.